nearby. Matt Lewis is a conservative columnist for politicsdaily.com. Dick Harpootlian is a former chairman of the Democratic Party in South Carolina. Gentlemen, good to see you both.
Good to see you.
You know,
Thank you.
Dick, let me start with you since you're the Democrat here. There's a report in the Daily News, you may have seen it today, that Democrats are vigorously complaining to the White House that they were blindsided by this. And the president's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, has apparently been spending the last 3 days placing phone calls, damage control with angry Dems, begging them not to come out publicly against the president. Would you agree that the White House bungled this thing?
I wouldn't agree they bungled it. I think the president probably should have given folks a heads up on it. But let's remember, all he said was that folks ought to be able to practice their religion where they want to in this country. He didn't advocate the location of this mosque at this location, although I must say to you, it is 2.5 blocks away from Ground Zero. It is where a Burlington coat factory store had been for a number of years. So, I mean, there are a number of bogus issues here. But more important than that, this is becoming and has been an emotional issue, which, of course, I think many Republicans would like to ignite so that the voters ignore the real issues this fall, which are the economy, the wars we're fighting, and how we resolve those in a rational way. This is a distraction.
Dick, I'm sure you've never met a politician who doesn't like to exploit an issue. But, Matt, let me go to you on this. On Friday, the president seemed to endorse the notion of a mosque at Ground Zero, which alienated those who oppose it. Then the next day backs off, alienating those who support it. And here's how the editorial in the New York Post today put it. Quote, does anybody really know what President Obama's position is? He had an opportunity to show real leadership on the issue. Instead, he made an even bigger muddle of it. Not surprising, but sad. Do they have a point?
I think they do have a point. Look, in politics, when you're talking about campaign politics, nuance typically doesn't work. But what happened is President Obama came out with this statement. People thought they knew what he meant, that he supported the building of this mosque. Then the next day or a couple days later, he walks back from it. So what happens is his supporters are now lukewarm supporters, but his enemies are just as fired up.
Yeah.
So really what happened is it's a lose-lose proposition. Unfortunately now for President Obama, most Americans view him as supporting this mosque. They don't get into the nuance over whether he believes that the wisdom, as he said, of it.
But Matt, let me stop you there. I want to be fair here, and Dick, I'll get to you in just a second. But New Jersey's governor, Republican Chris Christie, is bucking his party, and he's saying, hey, come on, you guys, both sides, Republicans and Democrats, are using this as a political football. Is Christie the only guy with a clear head here?
Well, first of all, Barack Obama made this an issue. This was not. This was a pundit issue. This was something that was merely talked about, maybe on cable TV or on the blogs. But when President Obama addressed it, he did inject this into the national bloodstream. Now, Democratic people running for Congress are going to have to answer this question. In terms of Chris Christie, look, I don't think his answer is a profile in courage either. He chose not to get into this great debate. He chose to basically say no comment, but try to position himself as taking the moral high ground. He really didn't have an answer.
What's confounding, Dick, is this is a president who has a proclivity, I think it's fair to say, to weigh in on just about every issue conceivable, even something as small as the arrest of a black professor, which over racial profiling allegations, which is a local, purely municipal issue. And yet he won't weigh in on this issue, which is important to a great many Americans. How can you explain that?
Well, I think he has weighed in. He said, the First Amendment.
He said, I will not comment on the wisdom of putting a mosque at Ground Zero. That's a quote.
Well, and I agree with him. That's a local issue to be dealt with by New York folks. Patterson's attempting to work something out. And he doesn't live in New York. He's not part of that New York process.
He weighed in in Boston, Massachusetts on a professor.
He has said he should not make this decision based on religious bigotry. That's what he said. I believe that, and I think most Americans believe that.
Yeah.
The political pundits are going to parse this out and say, well, he's for a mosque there. That's not true. That's not true.
But that's what,
if he was,
on election day, that's what most Americans are going to think, though. That this is one more example of President Obama being out of touch with, look at elections in places like Ohio and North Carolina. The perception now, fair or not, is that he supports this mosque, which most Americans don't. That's bad news. And by the way, forget about changing the subject. If we talk about the economy, if we talk about the war, Obama still loses.
Dick, the co-founder of Hamas, backs the project, and the leader of this planned mosque at Ground Zero refuses to label Hamas as a terrorist organization, which our federal government does. Does that give you pause, and should it?
It sounds to me like he's the Islamic version of Jerry Falwell. I mean, there are fringe people on both sides. He's not advocating violence. He's not part of the 9/11. He is apparently a pretty conservative Islamic preacher. He's, again, the Islamic version of Jerry Falwell.
Well,
I don't see anybody screaming and yelling about Jerry.
It's true Hamas has a political wing, but it's also labeled a terrorist organization. So, Dick Harpootlian, thank you so much for being with us as well.
Sure.
And thank you so much, Matt.